Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Brewmaster Series, where we'll be chatting with head brewers from all around Ireland, breaking down one of their signature brews from start to finish. And if you're a home brewer too, you can even have a bash of brewing it yourself. We're making the homebrew clone recipes available to everyone too. So tonight we have Bill Laukitis from Rye River Brewing joining us, talking all about their Big Bangin IPA, which is a beer that's dear to many people's hearts, which I know. Then we're followed by Sean Colohan from Wide Street Brewing, who'll be breaking down his House Saison. And he's just absolutely knocking it out of the park with his wild and mixed fermentations, what he's doing. Unfortunately, we've had a very late casualty. John Allen from Wicklow Wolf is unwell at the moment. He has laryngitis. He literally can't speak. He tried to speak earlier and his voice is completely gone. So he's going to be joining us at the next session on November 18th. So if you have your Apex Stout, hold on to it till then, or enjoy tonight and then have it again in 2 weeks' time. So apologies for that. So just some housekeeping. Obviously, you're all very welcome to join this evening. I see some familiar faces as usual, which is great, and brand new ones too, which is absolutely brilliant to see. Please know these events are 100% audience fueled. Please get the interaction going. Questions, comments in throughout. We'll jump to them as we're chatting. We'll be spending about 20 to 25 minutes chatting about each beer with each brewer. Then afterwards, we'll open it up for general chat, and that's kind of when the chaos tends to ensue. So we'll stick around to the end and we'll open up for open chats. And I suppose our general flow throughout the event, we want to be welcoming each brewer, hearing a bit about their background, move on to the beer tasting and overview of the style, and then we're going to be breaking it down by ingredients, process, and looking at the water profile, and then any final comments, words of wisdom from the brewer to aid with brewing it yourself, maybe, and then some questions as well. So that's it. I'm going to stop yapping. I'm going to welcome Bill in. I'm going to welcome you, actually. If you haven't already opened up your Big Bangin IPA, poured it, got in your glass, please do that. And Bill, while people are getting acquainted with it, why don't you say hello, introduce yourself, and I suppose tell us a bit how you became head brewer at Rye River too.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Rye River Brewing Company tonight. You've actually got a glimpse through the back window of our bar there into the production floor tonight, which is cool. So we've actually got a quiet night on in the brewery for once, which is a wonderful thing. Behind me, you might see a few of the lads walking around. They're looping our nitro stout tonight, Eventide, which maybe you've gotten to enjoy in the pubs. It used to be Jim's Stout under the McGargo's badge, but since we've moved to the Rye River brand and in the pubs, that's Eventide. Great beer. Had one last week when I was off on holidays in the Brazen Head, and it's the time of year for it, isn't it? I myself, though, so you'll probably picked up, don't have the most Irish of twang kicking about. I'm grew up in Holland, Michigan, but moved over to Ireland about 10 years ago. And very quickly in Ireland, what do? But you find your way into a few pubs. You're enjoying all the beers. You might do that visitor experience at the Guinness Storehouse, and I found my way into the storehouse one day thinking, man, this would be a fun place to work. It drove my homebrewing passion forward, as well as like all the beer I'd been loving around the world. This was the 7th country I've lived and worked in. And all of a sudden it was like, you know what, it's time to do something more than just with these plastic buckets. And I found an opportunity with some friends at the time. Alex had become the head brewer here back then. And he gave me a phone call one day and said, hey, do you want to come apprentice in here and learn to brew on more than a bucket? And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. So came in, and that's really the story of a lot of our brewers here. They kind of found their way home brewing, walked in the doors and worked their way up through our ranks from assistant brewers, transition brewers, shift brewers. For the last few years, about 2017 or so, 2018, it's all fuzzy, stepped up as lead brewer or head brewer, and this is our story.
Amazing, brilliant, great to hear. Lots of hope for people out there as well, for home brewers who are tuning in as well and might have aspirations of kind of moving into the industry. It's that's brilliant to hear. Absolutely great. Okay, I'm thinking the beer then. I've poured mine. I'm starting to enjoy it already. I can see other people are at it too. What do we got here? First of all, our beer style, I suppose. What are we looking at? What are we tasting?
Yeah, cool. This is Big Bangin IPA, which is a West Coast, American West Coast style IPA. So Big Bangin, you probably it's been around for a few years. I think we launched it back in 2016 for, I want to say it was Alltech. The craft beer fest that was happening back then is when we brought this beer to life. And, it was cool. It was well received at Alltech that year. It won the Dublin Craft Beer Cup, which was pretty cool. And we were all real excited. It was that first beer in the brewery. I think that everybody really was like, man, that's cracking beer. So West Coast IPA it's a clean IPA on the malt bill. It's not weighted down by all the maybe caramel notes that a traditional English IPA would be bringing to the table. So it's light in color. It's malty but clean malt, and then a prominent bitterness. Now, I mean, these can be dialed up to 11. Ours is a little subdued in that respect, but today it's quite bitter considering the way that the palate's gone softer on bitterness in recent years. So it's your clean, good-looking, golden, bitter, smooth, very hoppy West Coast American style IPA. And in fact, if I remember correctly, I want to say this one was the country winner in Ireland this year for American style IPA in the WBAs this year, which is also, it continues to stay current, even though it's a beer we dropped back in 2016.
Yeah, amazing. That's brilliant to hear. And it's understandable too. It's absolutely tasting incredible as per usual. I'm going to ask you, before we start getting stuck into it and really breaking it down, what is it that you like about this beer most? Like, you're obviously brewing it quite often. Like, what makes you keep coming back to it?
And for me right now, my favorite thing about it is the fact that it's just jumped into a 330 ml can. This could just be the total American in me, but there's something about enjoying a fresh beer out of a can. It's that bit crisper, that bit cooler, as you're enjoying a mouthful. It's kind of, maybe it's a nostalgia thing. I don't know. That being said, Francis has always had that big punchy nose that punches a kind of, I don't know, what is it like for me on the nose? It's pineapple punches out to dank citrus to a bit of a pine note. Like that's the invitation to this beer for me. And then you've got this lovely mouthfeel that, though it's a beer that finishes, not with a hefty body behind it. It's the body you really taste on this beer is the alcohol that's present in there. So that malt meets that 7% alcohol and the oiliness of those hops, and it just coats the tongue, but it lingers pleasantly, and then you're looking at, hey, it's time for another sip.
Hey, amazing. So then that brings us on to it then. So how do you go about brewing a beer that does all those things, what you just said? Where do we even begin?
Yeah, look, I guess, brewing recipes, the first place you're starting is with the ingredients. So, it's water, it's your malt, it's your hops, and it's your yeast. So if we want to jump into this recipe, let's do it. I guess for me, I would think about, the malt bill and the hops at the beginning, decide what kind of style of beer that I'm going for, and look at the malt and the hops that I'm going to use, and then kind of tweak the water profile to accentuate what we've chosen to put in the beer. So I don't know, how are you doing this tonight, Brian? Are you sharing out the recipe at any point on the screen, or we're just talking through it and it'll be available later? What's the story?
Yeah, I'll share it on screen now. I'll share what you sent across and we can talk through it if that works.
Yeah, I think, my face is boring pretty quick, but if people are listening to what I'm saying, they might get some info out of this. So let's start with the grist, because that's the way we're going to go down through it. So as a brewery here, we've had a big love for Maris Otter as a malt, and always have. And early on, we brought over traditionally floor malted malts from Warminster Maltings, and their Maris Otter was exceptional. Over the years, I've built up a strong relationship with the with the great crowd at Crisp Malts, and they were also able to offer us a traditionally floor malted Maris Otter from their heritage range at their number 19 maltings. So we found a great relationship with them as we swapped over to their Maris Otter. So that's really the core malt behind a beer like this. You're probably quite surprised. You're looking at this recipe from home right now, and that's 100%. It's 100% Maris Otter pale malt backbone to this beer. But that's one of the interesting things about Francis. There's a lovely character off good Maris Otter, and it's a bready, malty sweetness. So that is why it is a great place to showcase a couple strong hops that you really want to punch on. In this case, because this is a homebrew recipe, I threw a sigillated malt back into it. Now, we did brew with the sigillated malt at the beginning here at Rye River, kind of, really being inspired in our recipe creation through, the ethos of some German traditions. But with time, we have moved on to tweaking our pHs with lactic acid. So we can kind of talk about both points as we're going through it, depending on how you're brewing at home. But in this case, then about 100 to 150 grams of acidulated malt should balance out that 7 kgs as this kind of 26-liter recipe sitting to get your pH in line as you're mashing in. So again, it's about letting this malt shine, and this is going to be the interesting thing. If you jump down to the water profile there, I was just right below it. A strange water profile for a hoppy beer. Okay. On this one, we're actually really emphasizing the malt side of our water profile as opposed to the hops. And it's also a very understated water profile as well. Again, the rationale here is that Maris Otter is a real key player in this recipe. We're so in love with that malt, we really wanted it to shine on this particular brew. So we actually gave the water profile to boost the malt as opposed to the hops. And again, you're going to be throwing enough hops at this brew that the hops are going to come through, which I'm sure you're all smelling and tasting as you're drinking the beer.
It's cool. First thing that struck me obviously was like how open you were in sharing this. Like it's incredibly detailed. Like it literally is like a full.
Look, now I will be a little bit honest. We have taken the recipe and when I looked at it, I put my brain back on to my home brewing days. Okay, so this is very much the ethos of our Big Bangin recipe. But I've definitely taken the approach of if I was brewing at home on my plastic buckets and in my cooler, my warm box, and making this all work, this is the approach that I would take to brew this beer, this style, all of that. In the brewery, there are things that are a little bit different with our ability, with pressure rated vessels, stainless steel all around us, our access to a few things that I would drive a bit harder, but I wouldn't expect anyone to be pushing their home brewing that way right now. I know a bunch of people are, and there's some really cool equipment out there, but I thought it'd be more fun to bring this recipe into everybody's kitchen. So that's the approach we took on it. But by all means, that is, these are I think when I think about home brewing, right? I never did many clone recipes myself as a brewer. I did a lot of exploring into raw materials to see that I could understand what I was putting into a recipe, so I felt confident to do so with time when it mattered. And with this recipe as well, this is actually one of those great ones. This is a recipe that lets you understand Maris Otter because that's the malt that's showcasing so well. And the two hops that are in it as well, they're hops that play very nicely, which is Simcoe and Mosaic. And we'll get to that down there in a moment. But I would encourage anybody who's going to try to brew this at home, don't be afraid to look at this recipe as your inspiration for that. Dial it into your kit And then also dial it into your taste buds. You know what I mean? Like our efficiencies in our whirlpool and the way it holds temperature and what that allows us to do in the ways that we want to do things, they're a bit different than, than a plastic bucket that you're stirring with a spoon. You know what I mean? To get some whirlpool action, or if you've got a nicer kit and you've got a pump involved and all of that, it's going to be different temperatures and the ways that we hold things, and we can talk about all of that through all this if we want. But just I'd say more be inspired, but you'll see why, because we'll talk about a few of those things that I've left a little open-ended. And if anybody has a specific question, I'm happy to jump right in there. So we've got our grist. We've got a water profile. Again, like I said, it's soft, it's understated, and it's more aimed at gearing towards the chloride content than the sulfate. Okay, so again, counterintuitive maybe to what you're expecting to see here today. Now we're jumping down to the mash. Okay, now again, when I was home brewing, and my buckets are still upstairs in the brewery, because even into years in my brewing here, sometimes you'd pull them in on a night shift and you'd have a little 30-gallon brew going in the background while you were doing other things. No reason to ever stop your passion for brewing and learning. In this case, we're looking at a mash for a first stand at 65 degrees. So if you're brewing on a simple system, you're bringing your hot liquor to a temperature that's a bit warmer than that, and you're going to compensate for the temperature of your mash tun of the malt itself, so that when you mix things in, if you've got the ability to just make the amount of hot liquor that you need, I would put your salts in to bring that up. Now, the biggest thing is, right, if you're brewing at home and you're using your mains water, find a way to strip the chlorine out of that. That's going to ruin every home brew that you ever make. That's the biggest thing. I don't expect you all to have an RO plant like we do here that allows us to take total control of our water profile. Some of you might, which is pretty cool. But if you don't, one thing you need to do is just make sure you have unchlorinated water for your brewing. If you can get the mineral content of that water as well, that's great, because you can build on that and dial your profile a certain way. So buying in water, even thinking ahead the day before you're brewing, and boiling some water, cooling it back down so that boiling maybe strips a few things out of that water, like the chlorine, that could be beneficial as well. Takes a bit more planning, a bit more space to keep everything. But that would be a big one in my opinion, that I always took extra steps to make sure I had water I wanted to start with, so that all the effort you go into brewing, it's not ruined before you got started. Remember, water's 90+% of any beer. You know what I mean? So that's a big ingredient. Then what you've got? So our mash stand, you're aiming for 65 degrees, 65 to 67. Again, this recipe is really designed for us on our brew house. Our lauter tun, our mash tun. No, our lauter tun, if you ever get to come tour the brewery, has a bit of a unique design in the way of the shapes of lauter tuns. It's not quite as fat and wide as it should be, so we've always had to adapt our brewing a bit to compensate for that. But in this case, I'm looking for that simple conversion, a good conversion range, to hit all your kind of beta amylase. So 65 to 67, good conversion range. 60-minute stand, especially on a homebrew kit, that bit of time will make sure that you achieve everything. Now, if you've got the ability to heat up your brew, by all means, then just heat it up. If you're having to do infusion brewing, by all means, the sparge water that's mentioned in the next step below during the lauter, you can heat that up so that you can get a second stand to bring you up to that 71, 72, and kind of just play with any alpha amylase conversion that's left in that Maris otter. And again, like we give that a 10-minute stand, and then you're checking for conversion. So if any home brewer is not doing this step, 100% worth it. You don't take things for granted. Like, it's one thing when you're at home and there's 7 kg of malt at stake, but it's a bit different here when there's, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 kgs of malt at risk and the brew that's going to follow. We also brew back to back. So like a brew length here at Rye River is 25 hectoliters or 2,500 liters at the moment, but our biggest tank is 200 hectoliters. So we might take anywhere of 8 brew lengths to fill one tank, and you definitely don't want to be throwing in a dodgy brew that didn't convert. So your iodine step, it's pretty big. You're just taking a small sample, dropping a bit of iodine on it, and checking that that it stays orange and it doesn't turn purple or black. That means you've got too much starch present, and you're not going to see a successful brew in the long run. Then again, if you've got the ability to heat, bring it up to 76, kill all the enzymatic activity that's happening in your mash, let it be stable, let it get chilled and get ready for the lauter tun. But if you're doing that double infusion type of brewing, I wouldn't worry about trying to kill your enzymatic activity. Just let it go, let it hold. What you're doing at home, it's going to work out just fine. In which case, now you're on to your lautering step. So if you've got the ability to pump back onto yourself, by all means, work away, give yourself a bit of a rest if anything's been stirred up, and then start your Vorlauf and start taking your wort back on top of the bed, letting the bed settle, let it make that natural filter that's going to take your crushed grain. But by all means, let it set that bed, let it create that filter. When you're happy with the clarity, which could be 5-10 minutes, could be 15-20, depending on your setup. Then you're ready to start sending it forward. Little homebrew tip from the past for me: if I was ever in a hurry on a brew day, or I wasn't confident in my false bottom on my mash tun to lauter out, because I would have done the infusions. I'd throw one of those nylon dry hop sacks on the end of my hose when I got to the point after my Vorlauf, and I could kind of catch all those little bits of barley or protein that I didn't want going forward at this point. So that can be a trip, but again, make sure that you're happy with the way you're pouring into things. You don't want to be picking up extra like oxygen at this point. So just kind of make sure you're not stirring things up too much. And look, start to run off. And if you did the double infusion, you've got that 15.5 liters, as this recipe is calling for, already in there, because you use that to bring your temperature up for that second stand. But if you've got kind of one of these nicer kits that's going to allow you to sparge, then get to the point where your liquor is just a little bit above your grain bed, right? You don't want to disrupt that grain bed. You don't want that grain bed to actually be pulling from the oxygen. That's going to pull in some harsh flavors, some tannins from your malt, etc. So in that case, start sparging when you see yourself getting close. My math on my kit, that would have been about 7 liters or so forward. Would keep a nice little bit of liquor on top of that, or wort on top of that. Now you're sparging in your hot liquor. I wouldn't worry about, in this recipe, trying to tweak your water profile any further with your sparge water, especially if you're not using RO water. You'll have mineral content in your water, and that's going to be fine. You're sparging, and for me, I would slowly run this off. This is not a race. I know some days maybe someone's trying to pull you somewhere. You've committed into that 6 or 7 hours of a homebrew day, but enjoy it. Sit back. What do they say? Have a beer. So let your runoff be slow. Take 45 minutes on a kit like yours. We'd here in the brewery be aiming for about 90 minutes to go forward, all things considered. And but give yourself some time. You don't want to compact your bed. By all means, you want to make sure that the water's traveling slow through that grain bed so that it's pulling all those sugars that you work so hard to convert out of that grain. Because you did such a great job just barely cracking that grist. You got that nice bed. What else? Then you're collecting your volume forward. It's homebrew. This is going to take you weeks to make. You got your bucket. Take every drop. Fill that bucket. Know what your vigorous boil looks like, and push it. So in that case, then you're coming to a boil. Funny story. First time I ever homebrewed, I was so excited. And I was transferring the wort, and I had my little Pico boiler, and I was like, man, all right, it's getting there. It's getting to the fill level of that element. I plugged that thing in, and I scorched that element. And I mean, I was probably creating ozone. I don't even know what. I finished that brew out anyways. And my first beer I ever homebrewed was a wheat, American wheat. And let me tell you, it was a smoked American wheat. Tasted like an ashtray. It was terrible. I still drank it all because I was proud I'd made it. But so like that, if you're only getting into the game, don't get too excited. Don't try to get ahead of yourself. Don't worry, you've got time. So don't go plug in your boiler and your element in too early. But yeah, so then in that respect, collect your volume. If you do want to save some time, when you see that you've got a reasonable volume in your kettle, by all means, start to heat it up. We do the same here, by all means. And as we get on and we know what the flow rate is going to be for the rest of it. And then you're pretty much waiting to get to a big, heavy rolling boil. So now you're in the wort kettle. You'll see on my recipe sheet here that it's all about tracking times, all that information. That's really going to help you for additional brews. You can't write down too much. You'll see in every section there's room for notes. Learn from it, and you'll really dial in your system, your efficiencies, all of that, and you'll find every brew day gets less and less and less stressful because you start to do it in your sleep, which is pretty cool. That being said, you're a brewer making beer, nothing ever goes to plan. Every day is the wildest day of your life. So you're in the kettle, you're heating up. In this case, look, we've got that simple malt bill. We need a vigorous boil for 60 minutes. Again, you know yourself, your efficiencies. If you think you'd be at a bit of a push to get all of that out of that amount of malt, you can either adjust the amount of malt that goes into your mash. You can boil a bit longer. If you want to dial in your gravity, taking a first wort and a last wort reading as you're going forward is going to give you a bit of a clue of your curve, of your drop off. You never want to kind of run too close to water just to get volume or anything if you're over sparging, if you're in that step as opposed to an infusion. So things to think about. You're boiling. So in our case, for this recipe, we're going with the 60-minute boil. And look, first wort hopping as a home brewer was something I was very passionate about. It's not something that makes as much sense to me in the commercial sense, but it 100% made sense to me in the homebrew sense. So that can be a great thing. Also, the kind of hop contact might make it so your boil, as it reaches that rolling boil, isn't going to be as prevalent to boiling over the edge of your bucket. So that could be beneficial. But honestly, this first edition for your what I'd call your bittering edition on a recipe like this is all about whacking it in there during boil, that first kind of 60 to 40 minutes. That's where you're really working on your isomerization, those alpha acids. So yeah, at that point, then this recipe is a fun one. You're just sitting back. You're kind of on easy street. It's an old school recipe that's kind of straightforward. A lot of IPAs today only start hopping in the last 5 minutes or flame out. not Big Bangin. So in this case, maybe put a bit of yeast nutrient in, if that's zinc, if that's Cervomyces, and the last kind of 10 minutes of your boil, it's only going to help your yeast be healthy. Bit of protofloc or, Kiragian, Irish moss, whatever you want to call it, but, to clarify out your hop break a bit more. And then look, get yourself into your whirlpool. So again, depending on your kit, if you're transferring across and you can get a very good whirlpool going, throw your hops in. It depends on your system. You do want a good whirlpool going when you throw this 55 grams of hops in, so that one, they contact all of that hot work, but two, they're also going to fall down, so you're able to pull that away without making a big mess of things as you try to run it off in a moment. For us, we have a very hot whirlpool, okay? We transfer from the kettle, we go to the whirlpool, and unless I run some special tricks, we're probably sitting up in the high 90s. So I consider significant isomerization still picked up at this point in the process for a recipe like this. At home, that might be a bit different by all means, and your heat loss in this stage might be a bit more significant. So again, you'll kind of know things to taste. Taste is king. So if you're brewing and you're not getting as much bitterness from your whirlpool, that's very cool, and you're just getting those aromatics, then you might want to end up playing with this recipe a little bit and throwing in a 10-minute addition or a 20-minute addition to boost that up so that you fall in line. We're saying you're shooting for a mid-60s IBU target on this beer, which is cool. It comes out with a nice bitterness balance against the ABV. For me as a brewer, staring at your BU-GU ratio is a good way to understand things, as opposed to just staring at your IBUs, and not taking into account everything else that you put that effort into the ratio, into the recipe. Isomerization, what do they say? It's about 79 degrees Celsius or above that you're kind of picking up your isomerization. So just factor that into your whirlpool. And if you're sitting above 80 degrees, you're picking up bitterness. If you're below, you're not, and you're keeping a bit more oil content from being volatile and flashing off. And then you're ready to pull this off. Cool it down, obviously, to your yeast pitch and temp. So whatever type of heat exchange you've got to cool things down on. I think for my kit, it was a bit of copper piping, running some cold water through it, but there's much better stuff that homebrewers have access to today. Cool things down. Again, now you're at the point where sterility really matters on everything that's going to touch your wort. You don't want all this effort that you've just spent the last 5 hours on anything being compromised and taken before that lovely yeast that you've probably been getting ready takes. So now everything that touches, if you're going to throw a thermometer in there in any capacity because you're homebrewing to make sure that that you're down at a good temperature for cooling your wort, make sure it's sterile. When that spoon's going in to do any whirlpooling, make sure it's sterile, because you wouldn't want to be compromising that wort once you start getting to lower temperatures, right? You run that off slow, you try to leave your hot break behind, and you've probably started your yeast, hopefully, the day before, or even when you got some wort early on. So yeast for a brew like this, you want a clean fermenting yeast. So look, we've got a house strain. That's what we're using for our ales and our dry hop beers around here. But I would recommend some of the following strains for a recipe like this. Maybe USO5, your classic, clean fermenter, Vitichico, some English dry ale yeast, or Look, I'm a Midwest boy. From White Labs, you can get a Midwestern ale yeast. I was always a big fan of it. Brewery from around my neck of the woods is well known for creating some great IPAs with it. So, you know, those are fun yeasts to experiment with. For a beer like this, I would say you're with a reasonable original gravity target at 1065 there. So you're definitely going to want to do a starter, not just pitch a pack in. So you can make a 1 liter starter with some malt extract the day before. Ideally, if you've got a stir plate, have a stir bar in there, whack it on your stir plate, pitch in 1040 gravity wort and grow that up for 24 hours will be plenty. If you don't have a stir plate, don't worry about it. Just every time you walk past the thing, give your vial a good shake. Let it suck some air in, and you'll be surprised. Keeping it warm again on 18, 19, 20 degrees for that day, and that thing will be rocking in the morning. You'll be real excited. If you don't have the time to do that, when you were back at your getting your first wort or whatever, run a little bit of that off, just enough to make a vitality starter. Which all you're going to do is take a bit of wort, make sure you get it watered down to about 1040 because your first run-ins are going to be significantly stronger. And boil that up on your hob, on your stovetop, and cool it down with a cold water bath, and get it into something that's sterile. Pitch your yeast in and give it that kind of 4-hour start to start growing while you're finishing off the rest of your brew. That's a big step that'll even get you around. Or if you had a dodgy yeast pack that, you know, was maybe past that ideal pitching date, things like that might get you back in the game. Yeah, now you're pitching your yeast when you're confident that you've got your wort in your fermenting vessel. You obviously want to oxygenate on the way. Look, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of went bucket to bucket, or sometimes when I was straining off, I had my bucket sitting up on a chair on top of a table, and it was then splashing into my sterile fermenter bucket below to pick up as much oxygen as I could. We've obviously got pure oxygen bottles here that we're infusing as we're sending to a fermenter. Get a good bit of oxygen in there, get that big frothy foamy head going, pitch your yeast in, put your airlock on or a blow-off hose onto your fermenter, and sit back and watch things kick off. And then look, for me, a target fermentation temperature for a beer like this, if you don't have the ability to control temperatures too well, shoot for a good just under diacetyl clearing range, like 19C. Be something cool for a beer like this. And then start checking your gravities. And for a beer like this, it's a single dry hop, but it's a big dry hop there. So again, you've already thrown Simcoe and Mosaic into the whirlpool to kind of punch things out. You're getting a bit of bitterness from that, the way I'm calculating it, because we would. If you think you're going to get less, like I said, make those adjustments. And that's your first introduction to a bit of, you know, Mosaic, bringing you that citrus, stone fruit tropical, to Simcoe, bringing you that stone fruit, bit of pine coming through. But then your yeast it's gonna play with all of that. It's gonna ferment out. Your home brewing, you don't have, maybe you do, maybe you don't have the ability to purge things as well later in the game. So get your dry hop in there before your fermentation's done. Obviously, you don't want to scrub everything off, all the effort that you're putting in there. This isn't a recipe that's written around biotransformation or anything. If you're kind of brewing your more modern NEPAs and stuff like that at the moment. So all you're trying to do is make sure you get your hops in there where that yeast's pretty active. It can still scrub off a bit of oxygen that might be picked up because you're just banging them in the top there. Also, so that the yeast has that energy to clean up any of that diacetyl that's being formed. This is definitely not a beer that wants a single note of diacetyl on top of it. You want those hops to be punching when it's said and done. And then it's up to you about what you're going to be doing next. Are you sending it to keg when you package it? Is it going to bottle? Do you need the yeast in there to still be present for your priming sugar, for your carbonation? Are you going to have a second yeast strain that's going to help you get on with that? That's going to decide all your steps as you get to your packaging phase. I'm gonna leave that into your expertise, because you know your home setup.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bill. That was an incredible run through that. Absolutely brilliant. And thank you. So detailed from start to finish. Absolutely brilliant.
No worries.
We have a couple of questions here I'm going to jump to. We had one in asking, what's servo?
Servomyces. It's basically dead, dried yeast, which is allowing the yeast that's going to be in your brew to eat that to get its nutrition. So we buy that in, I want to say Lallemand makes the strain that we buy in. If you're not doing that, it's probably easier to get your hands, because that can be expensive. If you've got some yeast from another fermentation, you could throw that into the end of a boil, and it's going to kill it, and there's going to be some protein there. Another thing that you could do is buy a bit of zinc, and that'll give your yeast something to feed on.
Okay, brilliant. You mentioned you're aiming for kind of mid-60s IBUs on this. One thing that surprised me was I suppose I won't say the lack of early hop additions, but what brought it up to 65 IBUs. I was surprised. There's a lot of extraction coming from the whirlpool, is there?
There is on our kit. Okay, so that was the thing that I was trying to draw attention to there is we sit in the high 90s. Okay, so if I sit some wort in there for 20 or 30 minutes, I'm really going to get a lot of extraction, because I'm still sitting in the high 90s when it's done. That might be something that in the homebrew scale you want to sit there and look at. You might not get the same extraction, but take the same 2 hops, whack them in at a 5 or 10 minute addition. There's great calculators out there for dialing that in. So for me, you've got to, I'd be happy with that bittering charge. You really want to be pulling as much from the rest of the character of this recipe at the end of the boil and in that whirlpool, because that's where you're keeping those flavors and those aromatics. For me, you could throw in any hop back at 60 minutes. You're just grabbing your isomerized acids at that point.
Okay, brilliant. I suppose a question in general here about limiting oxygen when you are dry hopping. Would you have any recommendations for us? What sort of time you do to try and limit oxygen?
I've seen it all. I've heard of some interesting lads. Some have worked here, some have been in other places. I've seen containers that can store CO2 modified so that they can slowly trickle in. Look, if you're serving beer on draft at home, you've got access to CO2. You know what I mean? You could use a bit of your draft tech to slowly purge the top of your vessel as you're pouring your hops in and top things back up. That would probably be, I'd say, what you'd have access to, because that's the stuff you're using at home. If it's past that, and like I said, get them in there when you've got at least 5 points left in your fermentation. Let the yeast scrub that little bit of oxygen out. Let the yeast be active enough. That'd really be my advice on that if you're keeping it simple.
Okay, sure, brilliant. Has the recipe changed over the years? There's a comment there. I could have sworn there was some melanoidin and some Columbus in there at some point.
There was Columbus in there, and there still is. But again, I took the approach to this recipe in terms of simplifying it. So the Columbus that's in this beer is in the bittering addition. But like I said, you're getting nothing from that addition. Columbus is a cheaper hop for us to buy as a brewery, type of thing. So what you're achieving there on our scale isn't probably as prevalent. What's cheaper to you potentially on a homebrew scale is I'm buying 100 grams of mosaic, in a little pouch. So I'm thinking about how am I going to use that 100 or 200 grams of mosaic to the best to bring this recipe to life. In terms of melanoid, no, never in this recipe.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that makes perfect sense with the hops as well. Brilliant. Thanks for clarifying that. How long do you recommend for the dry hop?
Well, it depends on what your next step's going to be. I wouldn't recommend that long personally, but then that means that you need to get that yeast into a racking bucket, or you need to take these extra steps. When I homebrewed, I would have left it until I was ready to bottle. You don't have enough weight on it or anything, pressure on it in a batch size like this, that you have to worry about yeast autolysis or anything of the likes, not from my experience on brewing anyways. So what I would say is get the hops in there, see that you go terminal, then decide if you have the ability to crash condition or not. We would do that here in the brewery, but that might not be beneficial to you if you're counting on that yeast to finish the job when you're going to be adding your priming solution for bottle or kegging. So it's just about what your next step's going to be, which is kind of why I stopped speaking at that point in time. But it's almost got a very specific question. I'm happy to try to field how I do it at home.
Another one from Mark there. What's your carbonation level and temperature for serving?
Oh, that's a good one. So if you go back to me talking about the taste of this beer a bit at the beginning, you've got this lovely malt character. You've got this, what I consider an oiliness from the hops, and you've got that 7% of alcohol in there. So even though we did a simple mash stand for kind of your beta amylase conversion, you're not really using the malt and the complex sugars to bring the body. You still have a significant body on a beer like this, right? And that's because of the alcohol and the hop oils that are present. So you do need a bit of carbonation to match that, so that you enjoy the mouthfeel of the beer to its fullest. So probably 2.4, 2.5 volume territory is a pretty good place to get to. We have losses in our processes because of the way we're bottling. If you guys are bottle conditioning or take carbon, you're not going to have losses along the way. You're kind of doing the math and working it out exact. So I'd say 2.4 is pretty good target for a beer like this.
Okay, perfect. Then finally, I think I want to just jump back to the very first question that came in from Richard. When you're experimenting with new ingredients, do you brew like a small homebrew scale at home and then scale up, or how do you go about doing it now?
Different times in my life, 100%, but not as much these days. And that's why I would sit there and say, when I approached homebrewing, my quest on it was very much about gaining knowledge from the ingredients I was using, so that when I got to stand in the kitchen eventually, I would understand, what was on the table in front of me, and I would hopefully understand how to put those things together and pair them together. Which is why clone recipes are great, but again, have a purpose, especially if you're pursuing one. Obviously, there's a point in brewing where everything's just about hygiene, and you need to know that you can do that and be consistent. Then there's a point where everything's about repeatability. And then there's a point where everything's about understanding what you're putting into your beers so that you can get that effect, or push that a different way. And brewing's probably the only thing I've stuck at for this long in my entire life. And it's because of the fact that it's never ending on what you'll learn or what you'll draw from with all the things that are going on in the fermentation. Taste every step along the way. Taste your wort. Taste your fermentations as they're going, especially if you're going to be reusing yeasts and stuff like that. Get to know every step along the way. Get to know it on your palate, because until you can buy expensive equipment to kind of aid you in analysis, literally this is number one, and it'll always stay number one is your mouth and your nose, because that's what you're doing it for. You know what I mean? Make sure that you want to drink what you brew.
Absolutely. Let me see. We'll go back to our other view. Yeah, I think that's kind of about it. I'm just conscious of the time. We've been chatting for ages, and thank you so much, Bill. That was like incredibly in depth, really, really insightful. A brilliant overview of the beer, and well, not even an overview, complete, I suppose, analysis of the beer. Absolutely incredible. I, for one, am very grateful that there was 2 in the box, because they're both gone. They're just far too easy to drink. Absolutely gorgeous stuff.
Cool. Honestly, get Sean on there. I'm dying to hear what Sean has to say. I've been lucky enough to drink in Sean's brewery a couple of times. He's one of my favorite brewers in the country, and an upstanding lad, and a very different. He's getting to do all the fun stuff with the dirty things that we don't get to bring into our breweries. So let's get Sean on, and I can't wait to hear what he's got to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Here on that. Thank you so much, Bill. And yeah, we'll bring Sean in. So, hello, Sean. How are you getting on?
How's it going, Brian? What's the crack?
How are things?
Not too bad. Kind words from Bill there.
I'm sure very true words from Bill as well. Yeah, absolutely.
We had a couple of good sessions in the brewery. I won't lie.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. Okay, folks, you should know the crack by now. It's time to get your House Saison, get it out of the fridge or wherever you have it, get it in the glass, start becoming acquainted with it, start enjoying it. Sean, while people are doing that, I'm going to ask you, I suppose, to say hello and tell us how you became head brewer at Wide Street.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Brian, and to talk about Saison as well. I started off as a home brewer I'd say I was a home brewer 8 or 9 years as well. And I applied for a lot of jobs at various different breweries. I won't mention like Rye River, and they wouldn't hire me at the time because of a lack of experience. I had a lack of experience, in fairness. But just with the beers that I wanted to brew as well, I was realizing that I'm going to have to start my own brewery and do my own thing. If these are the styles I'm going to make, like Saison and mixed fermentation and sour and stuff like that. So we myself and my partner Carla, we put the plan together to set up our own brewery. And what was your first question? How did I become the head brewer? I bought my way into the position.
Best way to do it by far. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So right, we're gonna get stuck into House Saison. First of all, I can see the T-shirt over your shoulder. I love Saison. I'm actually wearing my I love Saison T-shirt at the moment as well.
We can't flash them. It's too cold. I'm still in a brewery too, but it's like minus something. Well, it feels like it's minus something in here.
So if anyone else loves Saison, I'd highly recommend picking up a T-shirt. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're very, very comfy. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we're going to get into this. You love Saison. Tell us about Saison in general, I suppose, the beer style, before we get stuck into House Saison.
Yeah, I think the Saison style in general, it's a style that originated in Wallonia, which is the part of Belgium that's it's in the south of Belgium, kind of on the French border, the French-speaking part of Belgium. Farmers used to brew it in the winter and spring months for their workers, so it was ready in summer to slake a thirst when they were working their workers to the bone. At least they were giving them free beer at the time. So I think that's where it originated.
In terms of the style, then, kind of like tasting notes, I guess, like what are we getting from, like, it's such a unique taste compared to, like, I say, I don't know, other beer styles. So what exactly are we tasting here?
Yeah, I think we're looking for a drier beer. When we're looking for high attenuation, a pale beer, can be medium to low bodied, dry, bitter, well attenuated, high carbonation, I think is the main thing. I cracked open some Blaugier here last night as well in the 750s, and you need a couple of pours to try and get that thing to settle down. Like, so you're aiming for high volumes in carbonation. After that, earthy, spicy, floral, kind of the opposite to an IPA, basically.
Yeah, and a nice beer to follow on after it as well. It's kind of a nice palate cleanser, isn't it? It's
contrast,
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So then finally, what do you love so much about them? Why do you love Saison?
Yeah, the amount of experimentation that you can put into a Saison. It's not just there's no real, true, proper definition to the thing. There's so many ways you can go about the saison with the amount of yeast strains and bacteria that you can use to make a saison. The variations on it are endless. So the experimentation is endless, and that's the reason I got into brewing in the first place, is for experimentation and having the crack basically as well. Need to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love so much about the ethos of your brewery, what so many other people love about the ethos of it. It is that, like, wild mixed fermentation brewery. Like, it's spontaneous, and you can experiment so much. And as Bill was saying, just as we were transitioning over there, it's like he's jealous because you get to play around with all the, what did he say, the dirty stuff that you can't introduce into another type of brewery.
But I'm also jealous of all his bells and whistles, where he's not leaning into the mash tun and stirring it for trying to get that 150 kilos nicely mixed up and doing everything by hand. He has a lot of nice things I'd like to have too.
Yeah. That's the shiny toys.
Yeah.
Okay, so just before we crack into the beer, the recipe itself, just saying, Richard saying here, it always seems grassy to me.
Yeah.
Perfect for cutting grain and maybe cutting grass.
Perfect descriptor as well.
Yeah.
I love all the earthiness of the style, and trying to portray that and get all the ingredients to come as one and kind of do that for you. It's a style of beer I love. I'll never get tired drinking. Okay,
brilliant. Okay, so I suppose we'll get stuck into it then, will we? Will we start breaking it down? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So where are we starting off here then, Sean? We start with our malt bill, maybe?
No, we don't start with the malt bill or the yeast or the water or any of that stuff. Where we start is the armchair beside the fire. And you're picturing what is in your glass when you're trying to design a beer. And you're picturing the saison in your head, finished profile of the beer, and then you're thinking, okay, this is how I go about it. And then I pick my yeast strain first. So I go for Belle Saison. And a lot of brewers won't use Belle Saison. A lot of breweries won't touch it anymore. And I don't see anyone using it. But I love it because it's the highest attenuator out there. It's going to eat everything that's in there and take your final gravity down to 1001 at least. Then I'm heading for the malt bill, and I'm using the Belgian stuff if I can. So the Chateau pills I nearly always use, even if I'm making an IPA or a pale ale. There's always going to be Chateau pills in there. Don't ask me why, but I just love the Belgian stuff the whole time. Vienna's in there just for a little bit of color. I know it's not giving it a hell of a lot of color, but truth be told, I was kind of nicking the recipe, basing it on DuPont and seeing what they were doing and how are they getting their color, how are they. Okay, I didn't use all their hops and all that sort of stuff, but color-wise, carapils and dextrin is in there for head retention, but I don't think there's any need for it. Carapils and dextrin is not what's giving the head retention on this beer. Like, so I could probably ditch that the next time I brew it, to be honest. But I think all you need is pills in Vienna, because the yeast is eating every single sugar that's in there. You don't really need to worry too much about the malt bill. Calcium chloride is just due to my water profile that we have here in the brewery. I'm trying to hit the pH without using too much lactic acid or too much calcium chloride. So we're trying to land it on the... Yeah, I don't use Beersmith for trying to get the water profile. I use brewing water for the water profile. And then transfer all the stuff into Beersmith afterwards. For water as well, just using the water filter. What's it called? Carbon filter, just to strip out chlorine and stuff. No RO system or anything. I don't have to build the water back up from scratch or anything, but we'll see the water profile later on a different thing, I think.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
I'll
come to that shortly. Yeah. So like what Bill was saying about just stripping that chlorine out of the water is absolutely crucial.
I think that's important. Yeah.
No
matter what angle you come at it from, you have to strip that out. Leaving your water out overnight, or I think there's Camden tabs you can use as well that I used to use. Bittering hops, Hercules. I don't really care about bittering hops. I'm just using the fucking cheapest ones I can find, to be honest. It's either Magnum or Hercules or whatever's going cheap. I'm just looking for that bitterness, trying to hit a certain bitterness at the 60-minute mark, and then trying to round it out with some later additions, but also taking the flavor from the Saaz to marry with the Belle Saison. The yeast and the hops, they kind of need to go together as well. Like, so, and it's the same with IPAs, same with Saisons, everything is the same. Whatever yeast you're using, you want it to gel well with whatever hops you're using. So
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
So what's the Saaz bringing to the table there when it's kind of, I suppose, in harmony with the Belle Saison yeast? What's going on there?
Yeah, but it's nearly all the same. They're all doing the same thing. You're looking at that grassy, earthy spiciness as well that it's giving you. So, well, hopefully both of them are kind of kicking off each other and accentuating each other, helping each other to give you the exact same thing.
I'm definitely getting my glass anyway. I'm sure others are. Quick comment from John here saying you could hardly base it on a better model with DuPont.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
DuPont is what got me into Saison. It's like when I was a home brewer too, kind of experimenting the whole time. You're trying different yeast strains, you're trying different, when there's new hops, you're trying new hops, you're trying all the different malts. And I think eventually you find a style that you love brewing yourself, and then you kind of stick to it, and then you start trying to hone it in, and then you kind of fall in love with it and forget all the styles that you're not too pushed on. For me, it was Saison, and DuPont was always one of my favorite beers, so why not rip it off? Like, not that we could ever rip off DuPont, in fairness.
I'll edit that bit out, Sean.
Nowhere near DuPont, like.
Oh gosh, love it. Love the honesty.
It's inspiration more so than replication.
This is it. So I suppose take us through a typical brew day of when you're brewing House Saison, because some of the numbers I saw, just like, I thought it was crazy, like absolutely crazy. Especially your final gravity and your mash temp and stuff like that. So
yeah.
What's your process?
Typical brew day, and I love brewing Saison. It's one of the Saisons and Pilsners, they're the easiest ones because there's no whirlpooling and all this kind of nonsense. It's just a straight up, clean, lovely, easy brew day. I love it. Finished early too, and cleaned up and gone home and back home for 5 o'clock after not mashing in until about 9 o'clock. What are we at? What was your question again? Sorry.
Typical brew day. What's your process? What are you going through? So you've mashed in. What sort of temperature are you going for?
Yeah, I'm mashing low because I want to finish dry as well, to try and encourage the low final gravity. I think mashing low can help that. So I'm aiming for 63, 64, but on my mash tun, it's like a souped up home brew kit too, though. I'm basically 3 pots, but the 3 of them are 1,000 liters for the hot liquor tank, an oversized mash tun at 850 liters, and a boiled kettle at 1,500 liters. I got free upgrades on the boiled kettle from 1,000 to 1,500. Same with the mash tun from 500 to 850. Turns out they're way oversized and kind of not perfect for mashing. It's good to have the oversized boiled kettle, in fairness, but yeah, I don't have immaculate control over the mash temperature. So once it goes in, I need to land it kind of at least 85 or 86 or 65, 66, because it's going to start dropping as soon as I put it in there. Like, so I'm relying on the first kind of 45 minutes to do the activity that I need. I can't bring it back up. I have no proper control. So, and after that, what are we talking about? Yeah, 60-minute mash, and then pumping into the kettle, 60-minute boil, keeping it simple all the way. Just, you don't have to go crazy or do anything mad with it. Saison. It's the easiest brew to do and the best beer to drink. 60-minute additions, no whirlpools. What are we on? Saaz at 5 minutes. Yeah, that's sound. Cut the boil, transfer to the fermenter. And I know Bill was talking about earlier on about his when he was a home brewer, and he used to kind of splash from a high pot down into a low pot. I did that too when I was home brewing, but I'm still doing it as a pro brewer too. Only I'm pumping it from one end of the shed, from the boil kettle down into the fermenters, But the hose, I kind of have a hole at the top of the fermenter, and I'm just splashing down into the fermenter. So I'm basically still doing the same thing. That's my aeration. We don't use oxygen. There's no CO2 tanks in this place either. So everything is naturally re-fermented in the can. No bells and whistles. Trying to keep it as natural as possible too. Like so.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. Actually, Jesus, that's incredible. So then when you get to, so you've gone in, you've gone your 60-minute boil, you've cooled down. It's time to pitch the yeast. So how this is a type of beer that's obviously it's all about the yeast really. It's letting it do its thing. How would you go about it? What sort of fermentation temperature are you looking at? Or
I do have a proper glycol system here for temperature control, so I can decide what temperature the beer is going to be at when I'm going to pitch the yeast, and decide how high I can let it go depending on beer styles. I can control that to a degree, no problem. With the Saison, I pitched the Bell Saison at about 20 degrees, and then just let it free ride up to about 25, 26, 27. You can let it keep going as far as your homebrew system would let it go. I always found when I was kind of homebrewing with Bell Saison on smaller systems, and I didn't realize this until you start kind of brewing on bigger stuff, that the yeast creates a lot of heat, but you don't really see it in the homebrew systems. Well, I never did anyway, but it rockets, and I'm not too pushed on stopping it. I just let it go and do its thing. Like, let the yeast eat and create heat and let it do its own fermentation. There's no problem with Saison yeast. Even when I'm using Brettanomyces and Lactobacillus, I prefer stuff at around 30 degrees than down around 20 and 18. People worry about the difference between 18 and 19, or I'm going to get serious off flavors between that 1 degree. I could give two shites now, to be honest. I just let that thing keep going. No, that's not a technical term. I could give two shites, but
I love it.
Better.
So then, with a beer like this, then how long are you leaving in tank for? Like, does it finish very quickly, or does it take it time to eat all the sugars and finish out?
Bell Saison will work fairly fast. And it'll, within 4 days, you're going to find yourself down with about 3 gravity points left. But I do like to leave it because it will go all the way. It's a diastatic strain, so it probably will. I know I left that one with 1 point left in the final gravity. That probably reflected in an extra. I think every 1 point of final gravity can reflect as a half point of volume. So it might have recarbed a little bit due to that little bit of sugar being left in the can as well. But I wouldn't like to can anything with any more than 10:1, especially with Bell Saison and a diastatic strain. Just leave it until it'll keep going. Just leave it. Keep it warm and leave it. Get it all the way down.
Okay. And how long would you are you just constantly tasting and testing and checking, or do you have a general ballpark?
Check it once a week and just wait for it to get to 10:1.
Right.
And then you're kind of safe. If you're in around where you're happy with flavor profile wise, then you're safe to package.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I couldn't believe that when you sent to me, and the final gravity was 10:1. I think your original was about 10:40, 10:42 or something like that. It was nuts.
That's it. You don't need as much malt. That's the beauty of it too. You can scrimp on malt.
That's it. Get the gains.
But when you're mashing in by hand and you have a mash paddle that's about 10 kg as well, and you have to stir it, you have to dump the bag in, stir it by hand, dump the bag, stir it by hand, dump the bag, stir it by hand for 150 kg or whatever was in the original thing. It's in around 150 kg. It's the first thing in the morning is to pump the hot liquor into the mash tun, and your first job is to mash in, so you're kind of warmed up for the day after that, like Popeye after that.
I think Bill is saying he misses it. He'd be more than happy to come in.
He can pop in here at 9 o'clock any morning. No problem. If he misses it that much, he won't be after one go.
Okay, so quickly, so we'll jump to the water profile now in a sec. Just a question or two coming in. So Keith was asking, it's all open fermentation, isn't it? What would you have done that when you were home brewing as well?
Yeah, I did a lot of open fermentation as a home brewer. It's not open fermentation. Just the fermenters I have are not closed fermenters. They're kind of floating lid fermenters. Well, not floating lid, but you can lift the lid basically and clean it with lifting the lid. So the fermentation has a kind of or the fermenters have a fin on the inside that the glycol runs through, so I can control the fermentation through that, but you can't lift the lid clean off. So technically, it's not open fermentation, but if you get me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not completely fully sealed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to bring up the water profile here as well. I saw Richard was asking what's in the water in Ballymahon, so we'll have a look.
It's a good question.
So what do we got here? This looks crazy.
Yeah, I like Brew and Water software. It took a while to get my head around it because I didn't know a hell of a lot about water, and I really needed to know about water because I was opening for refill. So yeah, you send your water off to get analyzed, and they send you back all the bits and pieces that are in it. So you can see your sulfates and your sulfate and chloride in there, and they're the two main things that I'm focused on. And the calcium, not pushing that too high. Basically, you can plug in the little bits and pieces once you have your own thing in. My existing water profile is there, the kind of third line down from the bottom. And then depending on brew styles, you can plug it in and get tips from this software. And I always find it kind of works fairly well. I mean, there's a lot of reading material as well to get your head around this thing as well. And it really is, I think, but brewers are nerds. We're all nerds. Like, we love this sort of shit. Like, it's kind of water. I don't care about water, but yeah, show me the profile. Let me dig into it. What does this do? Why? You're always asking questions. But there's so many fucking questions. It's and all the different interactions and stuff afterwards. Once you start mashing in, it could be a different ball game altogether. Basically, what I try and do is try and hit a balanced profile every time. I know if you're brewing a West Coast IPA or something, you want to try and have more. I think they go more sulfate than chloride, but because mine is a little bit lower on chloride, I try and bring that up and keep it a bit more balanced. I don't even kind of adjust it depending on style. I just kind of keep a balanced profile for every style that I brew. But especially with the Saison, I think the chloride is, you're kind of adding a bit more body to it, or sweetness, or perceived sweetness to it. So the only additions I ever make are chloride and lactic acid bacteria, or lactic acid, to bring the pH into range basically. So I'm aiming between 5.3 and 5.6 every time. So you can see on the minerals down a little bit further, it'll tell you like 0.11. You can increase that to 0.12, and then it'll raise your calcium parts per million a little bit. And then on the right hand side, it'll tell you how much you need to add. I'm just kind of working off that the whole time. And to be honest, it brings my pH to where I need it to be every time. Once you have your water profile, plug it into this thing, understand this thing, and it'll tell you what you need to do yourself. And then you can kind of figure it out yourself, whether you want to use lactic acid or phosphoric, or maybe you prefer more chloride or more sulfate. And it's up to yourself to kind of balance your own version of whatever you're brewing yourself, like, depending on your style. And you can tweak things as well as using hops to kind of, tweak your recipes. You can also tweak your water profile too, little bit by little bit, and then see where you need it yourself. I'm just happy with a balanced profile. Just work it off that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think the single best advice that any homebrewer can get is that just understand your own kit, understand everything you have, understand your water and how it all works. Exactly like Bill was saying earlier, what's understanding the ingredients, using the Maris Otter for Big Bangin, and just seeing how it comes together and how the ingredients work off one another. Just dialing in your system as best you can.
Yeah, and you can tweak it each time as well. Like, the more you figure out about your own system, you can say, I wasn't mad about that the last time, then maybe I'll try this. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to keep it the exact same the whole time.
So a couple of questions here. So we'll jump in. Dara was asking, Sean, do you find any excess fermentation in the next batch when you use the same fermenter after using the diastaticus yeast?
Usually keep the diastaticus. It's FV4 is reserved for Saison. At the minute, I was brewing. We don't brew a lot of Saison because not a lot of people drink Saison, in fairness. But FV4 is kind of reserved for all the Brettanomyces stuff and diastaticus. Over the course of the lockdown, we found that we needed some more kind of IPAs and PLAs and stuff like that. So the other three fermenters were reserved for that. And we have separate hoses and separate pumps and separate, because we're re-fermenting in the can, we do a gravity feed. So we have separate packaging tanks for clean and dirty.
So I suppose as a home brewer, let's say, for example, we just have one fermenter, one fermentation bucket that we use the whole time. Like, how important is I suppose cleanliness, not just in general, but after the fact? Like, for example, if you brew a Saison at home and then you want to brew an IPA next or something like that, they can get everywhere, the little bugs, can't they?
Can indeed, yeah. Well, especially with plastic too. But to be honest, I never worried about it when I was a home brewer. I knew whatever 20 liters I was brewing, it was never going to get a chance to kind of kick off with a re-fermentation. The thing was going to be drank within the next 4 weeks anyway. So it was 20 liters gone. Give me another 20. But yeah, it can happen. No, you have to be extra careful, yeah. And a lot of people do use different equipment, but if you're cleaning it properly and extensively, then you don't have to worry as much. Like I'd like to read a lot of articles on Milk the Funk, and they can describe exactly how you can clean things meticulously and what to do and what not to do. And if anyone hasn't heard of Milk the Funk, there's a good Wikipedia there for basically all kinds of mixed fermentation and clean fermentation and cleaning practices and packaging practices. It's like a separate degree altogether once you start reading that thing, and I highly recommend it.
Absolutely, yeah. A couple of comments and questions here. Keith is saying it'd be some job seeing a version of Big Bangin being brewed in Ballymahon. I volunteer for the mash in.
Yeah, I'm volunteering not to mash that one in.
So, Will, as a father of two small children, a tap room near Centre Parks would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, where you can cycle to Centre Parks from here. And I have a collab on with Tom Delaney from Land and Labour at the minute. And he stayed in Centre Parks during the summer, and he was able to cycle in with his father-in-law and what's the father-in-law's son? What would you call him? Is there a name for that?
His brother-in-law?
Brother-in-law. Yeah, the two of them cycled in there, and we had a lash of pints there. No, there's loads of lovely little cycleways in Ballymahon as well, where you can tip around and you're onto the canal and you're into Centre Parks. So you can cycle into Ballymahon, have a few pints. I always welcome people in the brewery too. So if ever anyone's in the area, just leave a message on Facebook or whatever social media, and I'm more than happy to show people around anytime. And I do have a bar here, although I don't have a license to sell pints. I still lash them out.
I'll edit that bit out too, don't worry.
Revenue, some of the revenue lads logged in.
Yeah. This is revenue work too, yeah. So Joey was asking, what do you use for cleaning in the brewery?
NZ Brew 10 we use. We find and it was recommended to me by Tom in Galway Bay as well. He said that is the most high performance killer of everything you could use in the brewery. The NZ Brew 10 he recommends for everything. So I use NZ Brew 10 and then peracetic acid afterwards, and heat for anything like cleaning lines and bottling canning as well. Extreme heat.
Okay, nice. Speaking of your socials there, actually, and you're saying all the lovely cycle ways around you, yeah, like I always love seeing when you have your beers coming out or your new beers or whatever, you're always out and about in the bike or up hiking up mountains and like bringing the beers and stuff. It looks lovely, like.
Yeah, no, I love getting out and about too. Like we're kind of lucky during the lockdown too. We had the canal, and we're out in the middle of nowhere, not the middle of nowhere, but we have the canal we could cycle straight to Dublin off my doorstep and never be on a main road, like. So it's kind of nice to have that. I know a lot of people are stuck in apartments and stuff, but we're able to there's a lot of greenery and forests and places to escape around here. So it's a nice place to live. And that's where we have some of our wild yeast was harvested from around here too. We're harvesting our own yeast too. So
nice.
And I have a little kind of a little lab in the brewery too. So we're looking at the yeast and seeing what's in there as well. And we're incorporating those into some of the barrels that I have over my left shoulder here, because I'm still in the brewery freezing like an idiot.
Amazing. So can you tell us a bit about the Cool Ship? How's that going?
And we're coming back into Cool Ship season 2. Cool Ships kept me excited. Last year we did the first Cool Ship fill was in March. We kind of left it late. I was pushing it, and Tom dropped me up some barrels because I had no barrels at the time. I'm kind of fucking just winging it too, but I had the Cool Ship, but I had no barrels. Tom dropped me in the barrels, and then I went for it, and it's tasting fantastic. It's minute it's over there. I did a kind of a full barrel profile on all the beers last week to check gravities and pHs and tasting profiles and all that sort of stuff. Like, thankfully nothing needs to be dumped, so there's good stuff in the Ballymahan air, and there's a nice tartness to the beers, and I'm looking forward to releasing a Cool Ship beer probably after the summer next year. I want to give it another couple of seasons before it's ready to release. So
okay, amazing. Yeah, no, it's great to hear that the beer with Tom is coming out soon. Like, I think you just brewed that before the very first Crack Festival we had at Iran. I think it was like back 2 years ago, year and a half.
More than a year and a half, at this stage. And we're kind of at the minute, I know, like every brewery at this stage of the year, every brewery is kind of flat out with packaging and trying to get their Christmas specials out and making sales and trying to get them on the shelves so people can have them to drink for Christmas and stuff like that. So also trying to get Tom down here to bottle this thing. You know, Tom wants it in green glass and cork and cage. Yeah, he seen me yesterday. I think I was on Instagram posting a picture about brown bottles. I was packaging some other stuff I had in barrels. He was, "What are you doing with the brown bottles? Is that our collab?" I was like, No, whoa. I know you said you wanted a green glass and cork and cage, but he has his own little machine that he's going to bring down here so we'll use his machine to cork and cage, like this early 1800s type thing. This will be good crack, like.
1800s.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
So Kieran has asked, if you were setting up the brewery again tomorrow, for example, what one thing would you change, or would you change anything?
Yeah, I'd change probably the whole lot of it. But I couldn't change too much from, look, it depends on how much money you have to spend and what you can do with what you have. So I designed it kind of the way I knew how to brew as well. I was coming from a homebrew background without any real experience in a brewery. So I wanted something that made sense to me and something I kind of knew. So I just kind of scaled everything up to work to my own needs. So look, there's lots of things everyone I like, but I'm kind of happy with what I'm doing. I'm kept busy and I'm working, and everything is taking along. So yeah, there's loads of things I love, but what one thing? Maybe a little CIP kit, maybe an assistant.
You might have to take a
CIP kit. That's 2 things.
Yeah, maybe an assistant who owns a CIP kit.
Yeah.
Nice. So Dara said here, this is very nice to hear, very nice to see. So glad to see Sean go from our homebrew meetings in Tullamore to opening his own brewery.
That Dara Smith.
Yeah. So it was only a matter of time.
That's a distiller. You could do a talk with him as well. He might be able to do some distilling tips.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, might as well open it out, get more and more industries involved. I'm thinking it might be time to open it up to general chat, general chit chat. Sean, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Brian, for having me on. And nice to meet everyone. Cheers, lads.
No worries at all. Absolute pleasure. It's absolutely great. Absolutely great to see what you're doing. Like, you know yourself, I'm
Thanks.
a massive fan. I have so many fans here, obviously, including Bill himself. Gorgeous beers coming out of the brewery. So yeah, it's always exciting to see what you have coming out, and it's always one to keep an eye on, like, massively. So yeah, keep going. Like, it's absolutely super stuff.
Thanks, Brian. You keep going too. You're doing serious work for the industry as well, kind of raising awareness and bringing people on and linking brewers with people who want to learn as well, like, and people who want to talk to brewers. So that's a good initiative as well, actually.
No, brilliant. Thank you. I appreciate it. Massively. Yeah, no, really do. And just say thank you as well to Bill. Like, absolutely brilliant stuff earlier on. It was absolutely incredible insight into Big Bangin. Huge detail from start to finish, brew day, everything that goes on. Clear, both of you, obviously. I think every professional brewer is a home brewer at their core and from the very start. And it's really clear to see from both of you, like, the passion that comes through and resonates, and you're keen to share, I suppose, and give back a bit as well. So just want to say, lads, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, it was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having us, man.
Thanks a lot, man. Cheers.